The United States added fewer jobs than expected in June, signaling the labor market's growth is slowing. It comes as there are more and more concerns over the president's handling of the economy. In one new poll, only a third of Americans say they approve of it. In another poll, 60% say they believe Trump has not paid attention to the most important problem facing the country. But that doesn't mean November will be a slam dunk for Democrats, not by any means. A New York Times Siena poll found there are 6 states that are competitive for them. But if the election were to be held today, Republicans would likely keep control of the Senate. With that, let's enter the group chat. Guess who's here? Evan McMorris, Toro reporter for Notice. Ron Insana, MS Now business analyst and publisher of The Message of the Markets on Substack, is back. And the one and only Donny Deutsch, I'm thrilled he's here, former chairman of Deutsch Inc., joins us. Welcome, Ron.
How you doing, Don?
Ron, Don, Evan.
You know, I haven't been on a set with this guy since CNBC in the early 2000s. I mean, we were both
been a long time.
He had an afro back then. Okay.
No, it was actually a hairpiece, but... Okay.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, breaking news.
In one show, we've covered a hairpiece and boner pills. This is like a winning day for me. Okay, let's start with these new
They were not in
numbers.
combination, by the way.
Yes. What do these new jobs numbers tell us about the economy? And again, the economy is different from the markets. The market's doing so well today.
Well, the markets like it because it's a soft piece of data that suggests the Federal Reserve could cut interest rates before the end of the year. That is not a foregone conclusion. But we grew the economy by half the number of jobs last month, as was expected. The prior 2 months were downgraded. Wages are growing less quickly than inflation, which is problematic for most Americans. And we see that the areas of strength, like healthcare and social assistance, are still providing the bulk of the jobs, while other sectors of the economy are weakening. So it is a uniformly weak report, and it downgrades the prior 2 months as well, which everybody was crowing about as being strong. So the labor market's softening, inflation's still sticky, and we have this, as we've been talking about now since the end of last year, a mini stagflation environment where inflation's too high, employment's too low.
Trump keeps arguing that the economy is improving, and he points to the stock market, which is doing really well. But you saw those polls where voters are simply saying they are unhappy. So what is going to matter more in the midterms? These actual numbers, how people feel, what is it?
Well, all we can do is look backwards at previous elections, right? And we had another president who said, hey, look, the economy's doing pretty well, all told. But this inflation, you know, we're working on it. And when Ron talks about the idea of wages not matching inflation, that's what voters care about. They want more money in their pockets. They're not feeling it right now. And that's what we're seeing in polls. And I think that that's when you talk to political strategists, that they think the main issue really is. It's not the stock market. It's that.
Well, let's talk about messaging, Donny, because even though voters are unhappy with Trump, they're still leaning Republican. Do you think if the economy doesn't improve by November, it can change? Do Democrats need to figure out their messaging when it comes to the economy? Because for whatever reason, Republicans still seem to have this stronghold that we're good for business.
Well, Democrats are going off the rails. They're not even focused. What matters to people is affordability. And Democrats right now are focused on two things. They're focused on anti-Semitism and socialism. That's
not all Democrats.
Not all, but that's where the energy in their parties, when you look at the two candidates that got elected in the last week, one of them talks about that there was not that firebombing in Colorado was not anti-Semitic. I mean, would not acknowledge that when it was a firebombing of people holding a vigil for hostages in Hamas, by Hamas. Another candidate in New York, who's been well documented, was at a October 8th rally, a pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian rally. This is ridiculous, and they're both running on anti-American, not socialistic. Let's blow up, let's abolish ICE, let's abolish prisons, let's abolish everything. Let's abolish the police. It's insane. And the Republicans are going to tar them with this. This is the problem. Even though they are a small sector of the party, this is right now, every Republican strategist is salivating on what these people have said in the past, and they're going to wallpaper it with it. And the Democrats are going down a bad path. They're electing these Democratic socialists. It's a disaster, no matter what you think of it, wherever your politics are. It's bad strategy.
They're electing them in some places, but not every place. So what should the strategy be as it relates to the economy? We got a question from a viewer who says, so now does everybody see why Trump says affordability is a yawn? He is making so much money. Why would he care? The real question is, what is someone going to do about it? This comes from Rachel in Ohio. If the two issues to win this election are affordability and accountability, when it comes to affordability, what do they need to say to the American people? And to her point, how are they going to hold the president accountable in terms of his uber wealth while people are suffering?
Well, I think on the latter issue, they should be making commercials right now about how no president in history has amassed this much wealth while in office, and using things like cryptocurrency deals that some would describe as pump and dump operations. If you look at the investors in President Trump's meme coin, they've lost 95% of their money while he's made $1 billion in change. So you focus in on that and highlight those points, in graphic detail, and you start now. On the affordability issue, there is some difficulty in dealing with this straight up because there are no easy answers to inflation that's becoming increasingly embedded. Sure, certainly energy prices have come down because we're seeing more oil come out of the Strait of Hormuz for the moment. We don't know if we're going back to war with Iran. That would be an issue if it indeed happened. So, but they do need a cogent message on a broad shared prosperity that does not lean into democratic socialism. We talked about this before. The kind of, and I know this is out of, the Democrats hate hearing this now, but the Clinton-Tsongas putting people first, which we talked about last week, messaging of making sure that there's a shared prosperity and that everyone does well from the technological advancements that are taking place, I think is critical messaging that they're just ignoring completely.
I think you pick up the Ed Koch, you say you're better off than you were 4 years ago. I mean, that's it. That's the simple message. And George W. Bush used that one. Or George H.W. Bush used that one. And you just got to let me go off a little bit. There's just this anti-American thing. Some of these candidates have said that 9/11, we had it coming to us. This insanity. And even though it's a small piece.
It's a really small piece.
But they're going to get branded with this. They're not understanding. Do you remember what happened with the squad last election cycle? That's only 2 members. Well, now there are 4 DSA members. They're going to get branded with this. And you saw Josh Shapiro yesterday. You saw Chris Murphy. They wouldn't go there. They wouldn't put it down because they know.
Okay, but guess what? Chris Murphy had a video last week where he was speaking on the Senate floor. It was a long speech where it was the 500 days of corruption. And he went through word by word, line by line, all that Donald Trump is doing. Chris Murphy, who was hardly like, oh, my God, super exciting on TikTok, that got over 1 million views. People care about what Trump is doing. People care about the grift.
How it affects them. The grift in and of itself doesn't matter. It's he's making this and you're getting screwed. You've got to bring it back to the voter.
But also these candidates you're talking about, they're not just talking about Israel. They're talking about affordability. They're talking about Medicare for all. They want to raise taxes on the rich, use that to pay for more services. These are popular things. And also, if you're a candidate who doesn't have a critical take on Israel at this point, you're on the wrong side of a lot of the electorate at this moment.
I know.
So some of this stuff, I mean, we've had this conversation before about these extremes and where they come out of nowhere, right? I covered the Tea Party very extensively in 2010, and people said, there's no way these guys can win. There's no way this can work out. And it did. They won, and they've taken over a lot of the party. I mean, of the Republican Party. The issue here really is that these guys are running on the voters trust them. I mean, they're not just winning by tiny amounts in some of these elections. They're beating these incumbents by a lot because they have a message that is authentic in the minds of their voters.
They're not actually getting the working class blue collar. You know, it's interesting. The DSA, 80% of their members are white, 85% are college educated, 35% have graduate degrees, and they're losing with the real working class. They're losing with Hispanics. So there's this weird irony going on.
Yeah, look, I'm not in this camp by any stretch of the imagination. I'm a raging capitalist. But the DSA, or Democratic Socialists of America.
Let's be clear. What we're engaging in right now in this country is not your form of capitalism, Donnie's form, any of ours.
Right.
So
on both sides, right?
Yeah.
So you go from Tea Party to Freedom Caucus to MAGA. That has been, over the course of the last 20 years. What's happening, though, is that this is a response to the buildup to what has been the complete de-evolution of the Republican Party into MAGA, into a very concentrated group of people who are making money off the backs of Americans. And so there is, however you want to characterize it, I'll take the anti-Semitism out because in my mind there's a certain degree of that being a separate issue. What they're complaining about is the oligarchy or new aristocracy that is creating an environment in which they cannot move ahead. There is almost a permanent underclass in this country at this juncture that they are at least presumably fighting for. Maybe the wrong way, but I think that's what the reaction
is. The nerves
is.
they're hitting are the ones.
Okay, but then here's my question. What it feels like you're distilling here is the K-shaped economy and the political impact of it, right? The rich are getting exponentially richer and the poor are getting poorer, or they're just struggling. In the last hour, we were talking about, first-time home buyers are now 41, 42 years old. It used to be 30 years old.
Actually,
so now you have these people who are simply saying the system doesn't work for me. And are they necessarily, which, by the way, was how MAGA was born. Right? MAGA was born out of a group of Americans who said, in a globalized world, I have been left out. So is it that it doesn't matter which political party it is, that our lawmakers simply need to address that lower half, the bottom half of the K that's suffering and only getting lower?
That's the message, I think, from these primaries, yes. I mean, if you look in Colorado, for example, beyond outside that Milosh race, everybody who had any sort of D.C. tinge on them, they lost. I mean, the incumbency is very bad right now. And inside the Democratic Party, it's because Democratic voters don't think the incumbents, don't think the establishment did enough to sort of push back on Trump, enough to fight this stuff that's going on.
Michael Bennet did not lose to a Democratic socialist. He lost to someone who said, I'm not a D.C. insider. I'm going to fight Trump harder than you did. That's
correct. I mean, and I haven't been living in D.C. this whole time, been the Attorney General of Colorado. That's made people happy, and that's what people like to hear. I think that this issue of the economy itself, Democrats say every time you talk about the economy, it's good for them. That's what, if you talk to any Democratic strategist, that's what they say. These numbers are bad. They're not going very well. And that is bad for the incumbent party. It's bad for the party that's in power.
But they don't have a plan. This is the biggest problem. You can complain about the economy all you want, but they do not have a set of policy issues that they can put forth to address the really hard-felt realities that most Americans are experiencing right now.
That's right. Which brings me back to what I was saying at the beginning, that a lot of this debate that's going on right now is not about issues like Israel, which I think that politics are moving in general. It is an issue, a fight about economy.